Hi, Don Regio Dolphins. Welcome back to another installment of the Westing Game. Today we're going to be reading chapters 15 and 16. However, before that, I wanted to review chapters 13 and 14. So we always start off by going over our vocabulary words. Our words were scrumptious, an adjective meaning very pleasing, especially to the senses, delectable. Oftentimes this word is used to describe food. So when you're eating something that you absolutely love, you would say that it's scrumptious. The second word was contender, which is a noun, a person or group competing with others to achieve something. We could say that all of these 16 players are all contenders to inherit the will in order to find out who killed Sam Westing. I also had asked you to continue to fill out your clue cards and to write a 5+ sentence summary of the 2 chapters that we read yesterday, the what happened and what was discovered. Some important highlights. We start in Jim Shin Hoo's restaurant, and there is a second bomb. When this bomb goes off, Sidel Pulaski is nearby and ironically ends up actually breaking her ankle, which is ironic because when she was pretending to have an injury, that was made up, right? She was lying about that injury to get attention, but now she's actually injured. Another piece of important information that we find out is that Jake Wexler is a bookie. For those of you that don't know what a bookie is, that's somebody who deals in gambling, where people will come to that person and identify who they think is going to win the race or win the sporting event, and the bookie is the person who's in charge of the money and pays people out if they win. The next thing that we had talked about learned about was Sidel Pulaski and Chris were sitting in the same booth, and as invalid to invalid, we're kind of talking to each other, and it's the first time that we really get to know Chris and his personality. We get the sense that he has a sense of humor. We also find out that he wasn't always handicapped, but he became handicapped later in life. We learned that Theo, for example, will not go off to college because he feels like he needs to be practical and work the family business, because in order for Chris to get his surgery, it costs a lot of money. Moving on to Theo, we find out that he's in love with Angela, that he has got a crush on her. Kind of gets a little bumbling over when he has to talk to her, like he mumbles over his words. We also learned that Angela is really upset in her life, that she doesn't really want to marry Denton D. Deer, and that she has a hard time saying no to her mom. And part of that has led her to not becoming a lawyer. She dropped out of school. She never learned how to drive. All of this is because of her mother's influence. The reason why that's important is because if she's unhappy in her life, or because if she's always pictured as this perfect person, there may be a dark side to her. There may be more there than meets the eye. And so we have to pay close attention to that. We also talk a little bit about the connection to America the Beautiful. So if you remember, there's a scene where they're all kind of down in the lobby, and Angela and Theo had talked earlier about figuring out that comment, the statement, "May God thy gold refine," in the will is actually from the 3rd stanza of America the Beautiful. You can see that I've highlighted it. We also find out at the end of chapter 14 that Crow, who's the housekeeper, planted a note and 2 clues for Angela to find in her tapestry bag. This was very odd and weird for her to do, because besides being the housekeeper, we don't understand the connection, but she refers to her as my love and my daughter, which means that Crow's not being very forthcoming about who she is. And remember, we're supposed to be finding out who's somebody that they aren't, like who's pretending to be somebody that they're not, right? We're trying to get to the bottom of that. And all of a sudden we learn a little something about Crow, that maybe she's not who she says she is. Not to mention, we come back to Angela. Why Angela? Why did she give this note to her? Why did she give her the additional clue of thy beautiful? And I asked you to write that down. The last thing is that we had talked about America the Beautiful as kind of being maybe a clue or a key for us to figure out this mystery. If you remember, 1, the stanza, but then also Sandy McSuthers, the doorman, is whistling it. He's whistling that song, so it comes back, America the Beautiful. Now, had you written down the first stanza or printed out a copy of it, what I would have wanted you to do is take a look at these clues and figure out how they are connected to the song. Now, if you remember, the will said, it's not what you have, it's what you don't have that counts. So what I did is I highlighted all of the words that were attached to the clues. And then I started looking at the ones that we don't have, the words that we don't have, the words that are not highlighted, in order to see if we could try to figure out what's going on. So you may have wanted to pause at that part if you needed to catch yourself up. But I'm telling you, there could be a clue within that stanza. You're going to have to dig on your own to figure out what that is. All right, the last thing here was keeping up with our clue cards. These are super important because every time we learn more about these characters, it helps to point us in the right direction of the burglar, the bookie, the bomber, the murderer, potentially the heir to the will. So pause these if you need to, but the first is Jake Wexler. We find out he's the bookie. Can't remember if I pointed this one out last time, but Flora Baumbach made the wedding dress for Violet Westing. We learned that Sandy McSuthers has a large family. This is pretty important because all of a sudden it's like, if you have 4 or 5 children, how come we're just hearing about this large family now? And maybe there's a greater possibility he could be connected to the Westing family. We added for Bertha Crow that she left Angela a note and a clue. Again, why would she do that? Why Angela out of everybody? What is it that she's keeping a secret into her real identity? Theo Theodorakis, we added another one here about him being in love with Angela Wexler. Sidel Pulaski actually breaks her ankle. And then Angela Wexler wanted to be a doctor, doesn't know how to drive, never says no to her mom. I think all of that points to her not living her true life, her true self. So I'm sure right now you have some speculations of who you think is doing all of these things. And if you have ideas, I'd love for you to put them in the comments. I'd love to hear your suggestions. Moving on to chapter 15 and 16 today. We have 2 new vocabulary words. Pause if you need to. Guffaw and self-appointed. And then we're going to come back to talk about the wanted poster that we're going to create today. Okay, without further ado, let's read. Chapter 15, Fact and Gossip. Friday was back to normal. If the actions of suspicious would-be heirs competing for $200 million prize would be considered normal. At school, Theo studied, Doug ran, and Turtle was twice sent to the principal's office for having been caught with a transistor radio plugged into her ear. The coffee shop was full of diners. Shinhu's restaurant had reopened too, but no one came. J.J. Ford presided at the bench, and Sandy McSuthers presided at the front door, whistling, chatting, collecting tidbits of gossip, and adding some of his own. Flora Baumbach, her eyes strained, shielded by dark glasses, drove Turtle to school on her way to the broker's office and picked her up in the late afternoon with a sheet of prices copied from the moving tape. They had lost $3,000 in 5 days. Paper losses, Turtle said, doesn't mean a thing. Besides, I didn't pick these stocks. Mr. Westing did. Did he? The dressmaker thought of the clue Chris had dropped. No stock symbol had 5 letters or even resembled the word plain, but Flora Baumbach played fair and kept that secret to herself. 4 people stood in the driveway's melting snow, shivering as the sun dropped behind Sunset Towers. The 5th jogged in place. No smoke had risen from the chimney since that fateful Halloween. Still they stared up at the Westing house, murder on their minds. He looked too peaceful to have been murdered, Turtle said. She sneezed and Sandy handed her a Westing tissue. How would you know? Doug replied. How many people have you seen murdered? Turtle's right, her friend Sandy said. If Westing expected it, he'd have seen it coming. His face would have looked scared. Maybe he didn't see it coming, Theo argued. The killer was very cunning, Westing said. I read a mystery once where the victim was allergic to bee stings and the murderer let a bee in through an open window. The window wasn't open, Turtle said, wiping her nose. Besides, Westing would have heard the buzzing and jumped out of bed. Doug had an idea. Maybe the murderer injected bee venom in his veins. Otis Amber flung his arms in the air. Whoever said Sam Westing was allergic to bees? Doug tried again. How about snake venom? Or poison? Doctors know lots of poisons that make it look like heart attacks. Turtle almost kicked Doug, track meet or not. Her father was a doctor. She would not have minded if he had said interns. I once heard about a murderer who stabbed his victim with an icicle, the doorman said. It melted, leaving no trace of a murder weapon. That's a good one, Turtle exclaimed appreciatively. Sandy had more. Then there was a Roman who choked on a single goat hair someone put in his milk. And there was a Greek poet who was killed when an eagle dropped a tortoise on his bald head. Maybe Westing was just sleeping until Turtle stumbled and fell on his head, Doug suggested. That's not funny, Doug Who. How could she ever have had a crush on this disgusting jerk? Doug would not let up. And who was that suspicious person in red boots I saw opening the hoods of cars in the parking lot the other morning? He looked at Turtle's booted feet. The thief stole my boots and put them back again. They leak. A likely story, Tabitha Ruth. Doug pulled her braid and ran into the lobby at full speed. Sandy placed a large hand on Turtle's shoulder, a comforting hand and a restraining one. Otis Amber hopped on his bike. Can't stand around chit-chatting about a murder that never happened. Sam Westing was a madman, insane, crazy as a bedbug. He pedaled off, shouting back, We ain't murderers, none of us. Theo could not agree. If there was no murderer, then there was no answer, and without an answer, no one could win. Sandy, did anybody leave Sunset Towers on Halloween night before Turtle and Doug? The doorman scratched his head under his hat, thinking. One day seems like the next, people coming and going. I can't remember. Try. Sandy scratched harder. Only ones I recall are Otis Amber and Crow. They left together about 5 o'clock. Thanks. Theo hurried into the building to check his clues. Turtle had no reason to suspect Otis Amber or Crow or any of the heirs. Money was the answer. Her only problem was that dumb stock market. It didn't want to play the game. Sandy, tell me another story. Okay, let's see. Once long ago in the olden days, there was this soothsayer who predicted the day of his own death. That day came and the soothsayer waited to die and waited some more, but nothing happened. He was so surprised and so happy to be alive that he laughed and laughed. Then, at 1 minute to midnight, he suddenly died. He died laughing. He died laughing? Turtle repeated thoughtfully. That's profound, Sandy. That's very profound. Where's everybody? The apartment was empty as usual. Jake Wexler decided that Shin Hoo's was going to have a paying customer tonight. I'd like a table if you're not too crowded. I think I can squeeze you in, Hoo said, leading the podiatrist through the empty restaurant. You must have liked those spare ribs. Oh, yeah, sure. Jake watched his wife slowly stack her papers at the reservations desk. At last, seeming to recognize him, she walked over. Jake returned his unlit cigar to his pocket. Grace hated the smell. I've already eaten, Grace said, sitting down. Hello to you too, Jake replied. He probably thinks that's funny. Since when do people go around saying hello to their husbands? What's new with you, Grace? Where are the kids? And what are all those presents doing on the coffee table? It's not your birthday and it's not our anniversary. What was she so upset about? Or is it? No, it isn't. Those are gifts for Angela. The wedding shower is tomorrow. Don't worry, you're not supposed to be there, just girls. The doorbell was ringing all morning. I couldn't leave the apartment for an instant. One at a time, he delivered them, the smirking fool, and each time he shouted, boom. She looked especially attractive today, Jake thought. Between the ringing doorbell and the booms, she had managed time for the beauty parlor and the sun lamp. Mr. Hoo set the spare ribs on the table and lowered himself to a chair. Grace lost her scowl. Since you're here, Jake, I'd like your opinion on the advertising campaign I'm planning. Jimmy and I are having a slight disagreement. I say that Shin Hoo's sounds like every other Chinese restaurant to English-speaking ears. English-speaking ears, Jake bit his lip in an effort to keep silent. I say the restaurant needs a name people won't forget, Grace continued. A name like Who's on First? Jake could not help himself. He tried to cover a loud guffaw with louder coughing. Who pounded him on the back and apologized for the ginger. Notice that we use our first word here, guffaw. He tried to cover a loud guffaw with louder coughing. So what would be his reaction to the name of this restaurant? You remember that old baseball routine, Jake? Grace prompted. Yes, he did. Who's on second? No. What's on second? Who's on first? It's an idiotic name, Who argued. Who's on first sounds like my restaurant is on First Street. Or worse yet, on the first floor. Customers will end up in the coffee shop drinking dishwater tea. Not the way I'll promote it, they won't, Grace insisted. Well, what's your opinion, Jake? The podiatrist put down the spare rib he was about to bite into. Who's on First is a dandy name. Before he could pick up the rib again, Who whisked the plate off the table. Who elected you judge anyhow? The judge returned to Sunset Towers with clippings from the newspaper files. Faithful Sandy was waiting. Hoping to interrogate both George Theodorakis and James Shin-Hu, they alternated their dinner orders. One night they would order up, the next night they would order down. To their disappointment, Theo delivered up. They had no questions to ask him, but he had one for the doorman. Chess? Sandy replied. Sorry, don't know the game. I'm a whiz at hearts, though. Shooter, they call me. Theo left them to their sandwiches and their work. The private detective the judge had hired was still investigating the heirs, so tonight's project would be the Westing family. Judge Ford opened the thin folder on Mrs. Westing. Mrs. Westing? No first name, no maiden name? In the few newspaper photographs in which she appeared, always with her husband, the captions read, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel W. Westing. A shadowy figure, a shy woman, she seemed to slip behind her husband before the camera clicked, or her face masked by a floppy hat brim. A slim woman dressed in the fashion of the time, long, loose chemise, narrow shoes with sharply pointed toes and high spiked heels. A nervous woman, her hands, especially in the later pictures, were blurred. In the final photograph, a black veil covered her face. She seemed to lean unsteadily against the stocky frame of her husband as they left the cemetery. Sandy reported his findings. Jimmy Hu never met Mrs. Westing, neither did Flora Baumbach. She says Violet's fiance brought her to the shop for fittings. She says it's bad luck for a groom to see the bride in the wedding gown before the wedding. I guess she's right. Well, that's it. Nobody else admits to having known Mrs. Westing except me. You knew her, Mr. McSuthers? The judge asked. Well, not exactly, but I saw her once or twice. The doorman described Mrs. Westing as blonde, full-lipped, a good figure through, though on the skinny side. Mostly I recall those full lips because she had a mole right here. He pointed to the right corner of his mouth. Judge Ford did not remember a mole. She remembered copper-colored hair and thin lips. But it was so long ago, and well, Mrs. Westing was white, very white. Next, Westing's daughter. The judge studied the photograph under the headline, Violet Westing to marry senator. The senator turned out to be a state senator, a hack politician, now serving a 5-year jail term for bribery. But Flora Baumbach was right about the resemblance. Violet Westing did look like Angela Wexler. And that was George Theodorakis, all right, dancing with her in the society page clippings. What does it all mean, Judge? Sandy asked, squinting at the pictures through his smeared glasses. Angela looks like Westing's daughter, and Theo looks like his father, the man Violet Westing really wanted to marry. How did you know that? Sandy shrugged. It was common gossip at the time that Westing's daughter killed herself rather than have to marry that crooked politician. Now the judge remembered her mother had written her about the tragedy. Tell me, Mr. McSuthers, you seem to know what's going on in this building. Is Angela Wexler involved with Theo in any way? Oh, no, Sandy was certain of that. Angela and her intern seem happy enough with each other. At least I hope so. I mean, if Sam Westing wanted to replay that terrible drama, Angela Wexler would have to die. Chapter 16, The Third Bomb. Boom! Grace Wexler slammed the door on the delivery boy's silly face and returned to her party with a pink ribboned gift. The gossiping guests were sipping jasmine tea from Westing paper party cups, nibbling on tidbits from Westing paper party plates, and wiping their fingers on Westing paper party napkins. Madame Hu served in a tight-fitting silk gown slit high up to her thigh, a costume as old-fashioned and impractical as bound feet. Women in China wore blouses and pants and jackets. That's what she would wear when she got home. Grace clapped her hands for attention. Girls, it's time for the bride-to-be to open her presents. Angela, you sit here and everybody gather around. Angela did as her mother said. She lowered herself to a cushion on the floor, ringed by gift boxes and surrounded by vaguely familiar faces. She had not invited her few friends from college. They were bent on careers. This wasn't their thing. These were her mother's friends and the newly married daughters of her mother's friends, and Turtle, who was leaning against the wall, arms folded, smirking. Lucky Turtle, the neglected child. Read it out loud, dear, Grace ordered as Angela opened the card tied to the yellow ribbon box. To the bride-to-be in the kitchen stuck, an asparagus cooker and lots of luck. From Cookie Barfspringer. Thank you, Angela said, wondering which one was the Barfspringer. The next gift was an egg poacher. The box in pink ribbons contained another asparagus cooker. I sure hope Dr. Deer likes asparagus, someone remarked. The giver said she could return it for something else, although two might come in handy. A doctor's wife has so much entertaining to do. Angela glanced at her watch and reached for the tall, thin carton wrapped in gold foil. Look how Angela's hands are shaking. She's as nervous as a groom. Giggles. Bride-to-be jitters. More giggles. Slowly, Angela unknotted the gold ribbon. Carefully, she unfolded the gold foil. How neatly she did everything. The perfect child. Not like Turtle, who ripped off wrappings, impatient to see what was inside. Hurry up, Angela, you're such a poke, Turtle complained. Suddenly, there she was, kneeling down to peek under the lid. Get away, Angela cried, jerking the gift up and away from her sister as the lid blasted off with a shattering bang, bang, bang. A rapid rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. Rockets shooting, fireballs bursting, comets shrieking, sparks sizzling, 24 frame flower prints falling off the wall. Then it was over. Screams hushed to whimpers, and the trembling guests crawled out from under tables and peered out of closets. Is anyone hurt? Grace Wexler asked nervously. Other than being scared out of the 10 years of their lives, thank you, they were fine. Where's Angela? Angela was still seated on the cushion in the middle of the floor. Fragments of the scorched box lay in her burned hands. Blood oozed from an angry gash on her cheek and trickled down her beautiful face. Heirs beware, Sam Westing had warned. They should have listened. Now it was too late. The suspicious heirs gathered in the lobby around the police captain called in by Judge Ford. One of them was a murderer, they thought, and one of them was a bomber, and one of them was a thief. But which was which and who was who, or could it be one and the same? Some game, Mr. Hu grumbled, unwrapping a chocolate bar. One ulcer wasn't enough. Sam Westing had to give him 3 more. Some game. That last one alive wins. Now there's a likely suspect, Otis Amber thought. Who? The inventor. Who? The angry man. The madman. The last one alive wins, Flora Baumbach repeated. Oh my, what a terrible thing to say. Can't trust that dressmaker, Mr. Hu thought. How come she's grinning at a time like this? The captain offered no help at all. Neither the bomb squad nor the burglary detail had enough evidence to search the apartments, he explained. You call that justice? Sandy asked. Good-natured Sandy couldn't be the one. He wasn't in the building when the first 2 bombs went off or when the judge's watch was stolen, Jake Wexler thought. On the other hand, he sure did hate Sam Westing. Yes, Mr. McSuthers, justice is exactly what I call it. Not her, not the judge, in spite of the clues, Chris thought, unless she's one of those Black Panthers in disguise. Those weren't gas explosions, those were bombs, right? Theo pressed the captain. A nice kid, that Theo, Doug, too, Flora Baumbach thought. But how often had she seen television interviews of next-door neighbors saying, can't believe he killed 13 people, he was such a nice kid. Oh my, what's gotten into me thinking such a thing? The captain would not call them bombs, more like childish pranks, he said. Childish pranks? That brat's capable of anything. Turtle stuck out her tongue at the sneering Doug Hu. Evil pranks of the devil, Crow muttered. Her blessed Angela was almost killed. Crow could be the one. Bring hellfire down on all of us, Theo whispered to Chris. But she wasn't in the building when the first 2 bombs went off. Yes, she was. No, she wasn't. The captain described the so-called bombs. Just a few fireworks triggered by a squat, striped candle set in a tall open jar. The ribbon probably hid the air holes in the box. No one would have been hurt if the young lady had not tilted the box toward herself. A time bomb, Grace Wexler said, glaring at the person who delivered the gifts. An unhappy woman, that self-appointed heiress, the judge thought, unfulfilled, possibly disturbed, capable of the burglaries, perhaps, but not the bombings. She wouldn't have hurt her own daughter, at least not Angela. Don't look at me like that, Otis Amber shouted at Mrs. Wexler. I don't own no striped candles or no fireworks neither. That idiot is the likeliest of all, Grace thought, but he wasn't around when the coffee shop blew up. Oh, the excitement was too much for Chris Theodorakis. That was one heir no one suspected, and Angela, of course, no one could suspect her. Otis Amber was not even sure of that. Still waters run deep, he said. Turtle could not let him get away with that, even if it was true. Otis Amber limps, Chris noted the next day. Her family kept reassuring her. You're going to be fine, Angela, just fine. The loud snore that erupted from the next hospital bed was Sidel Pulaski, pretending to be asleep. I still don't remember, Angela mumbled. Her bandaged cheek made speaking difficult. Her face hurt. Her hands hurt very much. Traumatic amnesia, Jake Wexler said. It happens after sudden accidents. Don't worry, Angie Pie. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine, Angela. Just fine, Grace said despondently. I'll be back tomorrow. Come, Turtle. In a minute, Turtle waited for the door to close. She touched her sister's bandaged hand. Thanks. For what? Another snore from Sidel. Just thanks. The fireworks would have gone off in my face if you hadn't pulled the box toward you. Here, I brought your tapestry bag. I didn't look at your notes or clues, honest, but she had removed the incriminating evidence. Turtle, tell me the truth. How bad is it? The doctor had to take some glass out of your hands, but no stitches. The burns will heal okay. And my face? Some scarring, not really bad, Angela. Besides, you always said being pretty wasn't important. It's who you really are that counts. Angela wondered about that. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe pretty was important. Maybe she was crazy. She must have been crazy. Don't worry, you'll still be pretty, Turtle said. But wow, that sure was a dumb thing to do. Sidel Pulaski's eyes popped open in surprise. Quickly, she squeezed them shut and uttered another loud snore. Well, what do you know? Her sweet, saintly partner was the bomber. Good for her. Stopping there. My goodness. I had a feeling Angela had some secrets. Okay, so here's what I'm asking you to do. I want you to create a wanted poster with Angela. Now that we know that she is the bomber, I'm going to show you kind of what this looks like. I want you to create a wanted poster where you draw a picture of what you think Angela looks like based off of our readings. Description, meaning describe what she looks like. So you're going to actually write the description of what she looks like and what the reward is. Make sure that somewhere in here you say for bombing or for setting off 3 bombs. And then I also would like you to maybe add, and this is something that you could potentially add in your journal, why? Why do you think she's the bomber? Why is it that she's doing this? What would be her motive? Is it just because of the pressures from her mom, or is there maybe more going on? Or maybe is she not being honest about other things as well? So very big reveal. Make sure to continue to work on your clue cards, and I will review these tomorrow as well. Have a good rest of the day. See you tomorrow. Bye, Dolphins.